What about you, though? I mean, how did your journey progress in terms of, you mentioned Kavalidan and Sri Tiwaraji, and doing a different kind of thing, and with the pranayama and other instruction. I mean, would you like to say a little bit about the kind of instruction you got there? And, you were known very much for Ashtanga yoga. How did it change? And you mentioned before that we came on the show live that you're not really in the scene anymore. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
I suppose I've always just been interested in what makes sense inside, what is reaching me, touching me, practice in that form, and so on. And again, without sort of planning anything, this relationship developed, Guru Shishya, one-to-one, Tiwaraji me. But by no means is that all encompassing and exclusive of other aspects. It was definitely very complete in terms of practice of pranayama, very insightful guidance on that, and then the inner experiences that are going to come along with that. And at the same time, I would especially in those earlier years, keep up full on. Like I've been doing 3 hours of Ashtanga asana, and so on. But I would also, be in India and go wandering. It was one of my favorite things to not actually have a plan. And I'd end up in different places or ashrams or pilgrimages or up the Himalayas or somewhere down south. And I had a few years of a mix of those experiences, because as you have kids and then they start getting, really taking up your time, the energy shifts. And then I was also very drawn in by the Thai forest monk approach. Actually, to me, that's sort of almost the best practice environment, better than any ashram or place I found in India, because it was like really just about practice and in total nature. And the few places I went to, like I was with the last living monk of that Thai forest lineage. He's dead now, but in his mid-90s, and he was solid as an ox. Without any Ashtanga practice or anything like that, and then so these environments sort of allowed me to do my own stuff while also learn or try to understand a bit more there. So there was that whole sort of mix and whirl going on, and then. Also by the time you start reaching those advanced series in Ashtanga, and you're getting older, so I would have gone from my mid-20s in this to mid to late 30s, and then you pass 40, apparently, and even Pattabhi Joyce would go, old body different. And when somebody asked him what's an old body, he was like 40, and of course none of us would say that, but there are changes and it's different, and you have to respect that. And I would look at these continuing advanced series, and just actually after 2/3 of the way through the second series, my view was everything from then on is just a variation on a theme already visited, Just like in classical music, they take a piece and they do a variation on Rachmaninoff's whatever, and so on. So here we were, just, how many times can you put your foot behind your head, How crazy in backbends can you go, and so on. And for a while, of course, that is thrilling, but there's a point where it also becomes enough or dangerous, and for me it was, okay, I'll give up extreme asanas. But I suppose there was a sea change from around his death, 2009, 2010, in the Ashtanga world. And I wasn't too interested in just signing up and dancing to like a kind of some, fixed tune, because I value freedom, personal freedom and expression, even though I had been unbelievably loyal and dedicated, but now, it was getting a bit different. And my mind was starting to switch towards, further studies in this. And so really by 2011, I was kind of clear where the academic study for me would go. And so I ended up from 2012 on in full-time PhD study. And that kind of took more of I practiced every morning, every day, but that took more of the direction and path. And so then it's a culmination of practice, study, enhancing understanding. What does this all mean? How does it come together? Just because something is said, what's behind it, and so on and so on. And if the teacher says something, they have to can't just say, well, that's the system, or the guru did that, or that's cop-out stuff. An understanding must be there, and I suppose I was always interested and in search of that, not just what's in the tradition, because I found over time I was kind of fed a Brahmin Hindu diet of the teaching of this stuff, and the more I did my research, the more I realized, that's one biased view on this, and there's way more in this sort of yoga stuff. And then but of course, most of my study was actually scientific and in the science side. Now, to really get specific on your question, probably about the second year into my PhD, and I'm doing morning Ashtanga practice. But then, I suppose I've gone deep in pranayama and meditative stuff and these other aspects. So other things sort of happen inside. So now I'm doing this physical practice, and it started, having an impact, almost like a punch on the inside of the body as I would proceed. And so then I just had to start paying attention to that. And then I hit this new phase where, I've been serving asana for, 15 more years, and now it serves me. And it was a beautiful kind of shift. And in a way, all the years put in, whether you want to call it more dynamic with athleticism, I had the athletic ability anyway, with all of that, I managed the asanas. And so then you can go on almost with maintenance, but you can go on with the richness and reward of that investment in asana, as opposed to I must keep doing that same jump back, jump through for the rest of my life, which doesn't pan out or doesn't work out the best. And I was always a keen observer of those older than me. Anything from 10 to 20 to 30 years older than me, and seeing what was going on with their bodies and their systems and so on. So that, without saying anything more, that taught me stuff as well. And so then really, in the last few years, instead of me teaching specific Ashtanga sequences, I felt, okay, maybe here's how I'm getting controversial, and maybe some of the audience will have a reaction or mightn't understand, because it takes a deeper look into these things. And like I in the past, I never fully appreciated the person who was jumping off and teaching their thing and criticizing Ashtanga, because they only did it for 2 months, or 6 months. And then they were like, it's too much and I can't handle it, and criticize it, and I'll set up some new system or something. But, I spent 20 loyal, dedicated, hardcore, go through all the sequences years. And, my conclusion on that is almost back to Kaivalyananda and Krishnamacharya in the 30s, that the asana can be done in a dynamic way. And if you want, you can make it more athletic. And that's sort of gone off the charts in how people misunderstand vinyasa and all this kind of stuff today. But I call that a best pre-yoga, and then you've got asana as it serves the yoga process, which is a very much a psychological affair, a mental transformation. And so there's nothing wrong with the pre-yoga. In fact, I'll do a bit of it myself. I like it, and obviously I did years of it. If you really understand, the whole system of sun salute, standing poses, is technically from a different source, textual background even. Maybe you could say in the last few hundred years, some of the more recent yoga text had included some standing poses. But before that, zero. And even Pattabhi Jois himself would say, sun salute, Surya Namaskar is not part of yoga. We're just doing this beforehand. So then you take that, and then by the time you definitely get to the floor on, it's a whole different thing. It's like asanas that you could find, if not the exact same asana, a kind of a base version of it or complete version of it in one of the older texts. And so, and then there's a question of how do you do it? And in my opinion, and this is a well-informed opinion, it's that, because I used to teach this and I used to watch people, I'd be guiding them carefully about breath, about managing themselves, about focus. And once we get to the ground and jump back, jump through, it all went to pot. And, I would call it highly athletic to be able to get through that. And then you're kind of showing this, woo, look at me, jump back, jump through, which if you compare that to like some of these calisthenic guys, it's pathetic. The calisthenic guys would show you up in an instant, or gymnasts, or the way like Chinese dancers train or so on. But what was going on and what is going on with all these people doing a pose, jump back, jump through, out of breath, heartbeat up, breath off. So it's very clear, and it's not like, oh, you have to do these to make the asana easier. That's like saying, oh, you should be in a hot room to make the asana easier. Not at all. If you're patient and take your time, an asana isn't limited to 5 breaths. It's in fact, all the textual teachings talk about time is needed to be spent in an asana. And I'd still consider it dynamic, because you're not statically in one position. You're not trying to statically hold one position, even for 5 breaths. You're going to have a dynamic relationship with it, but it's based on key principles of asana.
So I suppose I've also noticed the same thing. Like the jump back, jump through tends to distract people in the end, and the whole thing becomes about the jump back, jump through with the asanas as extra appendages, right? Rather than the other way around, right? Like the asanas are like pearls on a chain, but people are looking for a big
chain.
The other way around, the chain is the the chain becomes a thing, But I wanted, before we run out of time, to ask you a little bit more about the pranayama, because obviously you have a huge wealth of knowledge and depth of study in that. And how do people are getting interested these days? And and it was only till recently that very, very few people did a pranayama practice, and now we're seeing it, as it's fairly common, What would you say is the relationship between asana and pranayama? And if people are interested in dabbling in the pranayama, would you have any tips or anything in terms of how to build up and what one's looking for in terms of the quality of breath, quality of practice?
Yeah. So, you'll often hear, and especially the old advice was, oh, asana must be really good before you start pranayama. And actually, you have to understand asana in terms of body management and not just poses or like an Ashtanga sequence. So body management would mean, you've taken care of diet. You are able to stably sit. You don't have to be able to put your foot behind your head, but that might be part of your training. What it also covers is what I would call a breath regulation, basic breath work. So what's become of greater interest in the public at large is breath. And some of those are sort of confused forms of breathing, or hyperventilation, or so on, and some are actual breath approaches. And then pranayama technically goes to another category. Like if even if I was to translate it, it would be no breath. The practice of no breath. And that doesn't mean you just come and jump in and start holding your breath, which certain people totally did in the past. It's just like you don't just jump in and try to put your foot behind your head in asana. You take quite a while and build up to that. So my experience, and maybe I'm not out there enough, is that still the interest, call it commitment, discipline, dedication to actually have learned pranayama properly and practice it is still pretty low. And a lot of the bigger name yoga teachers in the world, who are basically asana teachers, would come to me privately and say, "Oh, I've gotten too big or too famous, or I don't have time to learn this, and I never learned it, and so on. And could you help, etc." You see, because it's easy to do asana and then just go to some sitting thing like, "Oh, I did Zen. Oh, I did Vipassana." But actually, pranayama requires a lot of progressive, specific detail to build up. If whatever about posture, if you haven't established a regulation over the breath, then how can we properly progress with pranayama? So if I'm teaching it, part of it is getting people well established and connected to the breath, how to breathe, how that works, because all the pieces come together in terms of the pelvis, the abdomen, along then with the respiratory muscle of the diaphragm and intercostals, and how you manage these things. So then technically pranayama involves a management of a force across an inhale, and when you're ready, which isn't at first, when you're ready, a retention time to definite attention to how the exhale is properly completed. And you need to have the ability to do that round after round after round after round, and day after day after day after day, which is why, you might have heard of this phrase. It came in one of the later, more traditional yoga texts, but pranayama param tapaha. Pranayama is the highest tapas, and when you look at it, we talk about in yoga cultivating buddhi, and all our practices should be cultivating that, which means we really need to be in it and paying attention, and then very smooth breath and very much in tune with the entire system and body. And so pranayama, you can't walk out of pranayama and go, "Oh, I just had an amazing, breath today, and my left nostril was so open." Like the way people I used to talk at the coconut stand in Mysore after asana, "Ooh, I love your practice." And it would be a famous line there. And you just can't have that with pranayama. It requires tuned in, and this is a sign of buddhi, that an effort in a mental direction is being made. And for you to just even be with and follow the breath in that way, it's also buddhi cultivation, right? So which in a nutshell is insight, right? Cultivation. So that's why I've continuously seen very few people really take it on and stick at it. But I at the same time, just by the law of averages, and you expand the base of those, maybe moving out of pre-yoga into yoga and more interested in practice. And if the value of breath is clear in people's mind, I would say it's another level of interest and commitment to go with pranayama. Because
I think it's becoming more interesting to people as the stresses of the current times make it clear that the breath is a primary conductor of these different mental faculties, and there's something there, I mean, you mentioned at the start, though, which I wanted to just clarify with you, I guess, are you with Patanjali on saying that finally pranayama is a cessation of breath? Or is that your perspective also, that finally, because this is and I'm going to have a chat with Shandor Remete of Shadow Yoga on this perspective, which is his perspective, which pranayama isn't about breathing. In fact, finally, pranayama is about no breath at all.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's too limiting to say it's one or the other. If you were to take Patanjali in a very specific context of and very few people understand the time, environment, and level of teaching that text and the commentaries on it were put together. So what you're looking at is a very involved psychological practice. So at a certain stage, a culmination of pranayama is 100% beyond the breath, taking one into, because it even says, it prepares the mind for dharana, which if you wanted to translate that into tantric hatha language, that's kundalini and beyond. So you go past the breath, but you can't just leave it at that explanation. You have to, which isn't of super value to the majority, just like all the descriptions of different levels of samadhi and chapter 3 and 4 really are not relevant to 99.999% of people at the moment, though they might be interested and they might like to quote it. They're quoting, it'd be like, somebody who's made $100,000 always quoting billionaires and knows what billionaires are like, but you've only made 100,000 and you're talking about billionaires. So then you have to go into the tradition of teaching, which will respect Patanjali and the Yoga Shastra, which is more a combination of sutra with commentary and sub-commentary. And then if you go into the tradition of teaching and studentship, you can't just leave it at its culmination. That's like saying, this is the cake, great, this is the cake. But, there's a whole process of ingredient selection, putting together, time of how to put that together, the right kind of context, the right kind of texture, and so on. So, and by no means Patanjali was excluding or ignoring that, far from it. And that's why his textual work, or his or their or hers textual work, followed along with more kind of specific manuals that would come along from Tantra to Hatha, and none of them paint the full picture, none of them at all, which is why you need to be taught it. So then pranayama is a process that builds up, and you would have to have developed a capacity psychologically and physiologically to reach a point where the breath, even on its own accord, ceases because you've gone into a different mental state.
Do you think that's possible, that the breath can cease altogether?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
But I don't think it's that helpful for this kind of approach to pranayama to be generally put out there, as you say. Like it's the idea that pranayama is about no breath isn't really a helpful teaching instruction. And on those lines, as we come to draw to a conclusion in our chat,
let me jump in.
Sure.
On there and say, you could generally say no breath, because when you retain the breath, it's no breath. And pranayama proper starts when retention starts. And the word kumbhaka was first used in Tantra after the yoga, Patanjali Yoga Shastra was put together. So kumbhaka also just refers to retention, and it's even a synonym then used in the Hatha Tantra texts for pranayama. So in a way, you're like, okay, practicing it, no breath, but there's a stage before that where breathe. And then we add in an element of no breath with longer breath periods, till eventually, you can be more naturally experiencing a deep internal state, which is indicative of no, let's say even minimal breath.
Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. We don't want to be recommending here, if you're listening, to try to hold your breath.
No, build it up.
Yes, build it slowly and
get taught properly.
Yeah. Where are you going? What I wanted to say is, where are you going in the future with your teaching? I know you've just completed the PhD. You're teaching Ashtanga yoga anymore, or I mean, where do you envisage yourself going from now on in your kind of professional, if you want to say, career as a teacher and now a scholar of yoga?
Well, that at this moment in time might be unclear to fully answer, because I'm literally in a transition. I mean, my PhD was biological anthropology, hardcore, full-time U.S. academic world, and in a way, it had no academic world subject matter of yoga, yet I put all the yoga and everything into it, doing a clinical trial on that, and then about 60 original yoga texts in terms of that side. So in that sense, I've kind of shifted past I'm just going around teaching yoga or yoga workshops or something. I'm very dedicated to the breath and pranayama, but my specialties are in autonomic nervous system, stress functioning, breath, and the I from my clinical trial results, I have very robust, statistically significant results in terms of mental health improvement. Where, in a nutshell, and this stuff will be published in the next year, in a nutshell, certain protocols of yoga practice, when put together, clearly have an effect on mental health, which is actually the whole message in the history of texts, right? It wasn't like, wow, look at your body, or look how much you can hold your breath for. It was this sort of psychological shift and so on. So that that's my broader interest. Like I'll be up in New Haven at Yale, and my interest is to, I suppose, teach on different levels of the yoga world in my center in Thailand, Samahita, pranayama with that, but then also like curriculum for undergraduate or graduate students, because the few people who are quite involved in yoga who've done PhDs, to the best of my knowledge, all their PhDs are in the more philological or religious studies and so on. Of course, there's people with science PhDs who have gotten into yoga, but for me, it was full immersion in yoga, PhD after. I think it'd be impossible to do it the other way around. So for me, the interest is continue to expand work on research and writing about what yoga means or its effects, better understanding of it, teaching that in different environments, putting out the breath more, and maybe in a way, hopefully clearing up some misunderstandings around the body, how the breath works, and so on. But I don't intend to just sit back or just be Dr. D, which could be vain. It's more like, okay, now the work begins, Adam.
How do you structure the asana? I mean, have you got any, after all this study, etc., what was the guiding principle of how you would structure an asana sequence for people now, as opposed to Ashtanga yoga?
Yeah, well, just on a base note of that, like even if I took like one of the Ashtanga sequences and I just removed all the jump back, jump through from the seated bit, the sequence itself is smart. It's great. It's interesting. But for a lot of people to do that without the jump back, jump through would feel like they're cheating. It's weird. All this mental guilt and all these other funny things come up. But in my research, I the asana protocol I had put together was relatively straightforward, short, and I classified it as a protocol name of slow, engaged, dynamic asana. And I had protocols for meditative inner practices and protocols for breath, pranayama. But for the asana, teaching it here at the center in Thailand, it's just simply under engaged dynamic asana. And yeah, I have 3 sequences of that aren't like, ooh, crazy, mad. But if people want, just like Krishnamacharya, you want more asanas, we'll throw them at you. But in a nutshell, they'll have the sun salutes and standing as the more dynamic moving bit. So I even like, if you really want to move, then you can put a jump back, jump through, and extra dogs in between standings even. But when it comes to seated, let's say it's 45 minutes, or you could make it light at the active bit and deeper in the seated. Seated means forward, twisting, back, inversions, And so if one has felt stiff or other stuff, well, the previous work has done a bit of activity. Like there is benefit in the pre-yoga work, the elements of sun salutes and standing poses. And so I would never, personally, I think they're great. I'd never throw them away, and I do it myself. The question is, do you keep mixing that up with the other asanas, which is the system of vinyasa in terms of even full vinyasa? Full vinyasa was a sun salute with a pose in the middle of it. So if you pull that out, which is my approach here, then you're getting, okay, whatever dynamic active, but then the asanas as asanas. I'll just classify that under engaged dynamic asana, and it's for, especially the people I'm seeing, it's either people new to it or doing, people who go to recreational classes for years and they haven't made much progress in their bodies or asanas and so on. So it still has given them a sequence and a system and something to work with, which are good points all within the Ashtanga system. It just, the main flaw that I found was this, what has developed as an overdominance or too much interest in athletic movement at the cost of the asana practice. So my effort, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why as well, Adam. I taught this 100% full on direct for 15 years, and people would get it clear from me and be like, yeah, motivated and I like it. But, I'd meet them at 6 months, a year, 6 years later. Oh, it was too much. Oh, I had to give it up. Oh, my wrists hurt. Oh, my body couldn't handle it. Oh, I went to yin. So I'd keep hearing this. I'm like, I spent so much work teaching you this system. And then 8 out of 10 kind of fall apart, break. And then when I really start looking at it, I'd say, well, I guess for many it is too taxing or too much. And even for me, I can handle it. And back to the point you made at the start of this podcast, that yes, it can. If it's going to be that athletic, yes, it can limit how you get on in the other practices unless you completely separate them. So if you're trying to do full Ashtanga and then sit and do some pranayama, you're literally in a different physiology. So, and you can convince yourself otherwise, but you are in a different physiology at that time. So, I prefer to do other workouts that were efficient and shorter and keep them separate and then focus on the asana and then asana to support sitting, pranayama, and meditative aspects. I hope that answers that.
It does. It's been a wonderful chat. And I mean, we always round it up with a complete change of change the scene and just ask you a couple of finishing questions just to flesh out, for people who don't know you, a little bit more about you. Give me one inspiration, just off the top of your head, something that really inspires you. Could be anything, a person, a book, a place. And something you take pleasure in outside of yoga, like we call it like a guilty pleasure. I always ask people this at the end. So an inspiration and a guilty pleasure, just to finish off.
Well, I've had many guilty pleasures. Because
don't worry.
I love my coffee every morning. I love my dark chocolate at night. But I just as committed to watching Netflix shows or whatever it is, and inspiration. Well, I'm sure, given thought, one would come up with different answers, etc.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the whole point is to surprise you.
Yeah, my process over the years has also been tied up with these two sons of mine, right?
Right.
And you go through meeting someone, love, marriage, kids, but then divorce, and what's really there are these like two other beings. And actually, my first son, Sean, has done more time in Mysore than 99% of yoga students, right? And he's the only one that was ever got to sit on Patabi Joyce's like throne seat, because the Shrat used to carry Sean around and stick him on the chair, And when you ask inspiration, I think of time and life with my two boys, and going through the different life experiences and periods, and like now, without it being planned, it sort of evolved into the three of us will now live together and be up in New Haven, them in school up the road, me there at the university, and it's this 1 year, once in a lifetime inspirational mix that can happen. So
fantastic.
I look at them and that growth, which corresponded with a whole yoga time period and time in Mysore and all of that, and both of my boys were there with Patabi Joyce, in fact, my last time with Patabi Joyce was when he was with my second son for the first time, and he's looking at him from every angle. A man on the way out looking at someone who just came in.
And how old are they now, your kids?
18 and 15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, right. I'm as young as when they were born.
Yeah, that's what they always say, isn't it? Yeah. I feel the same as I did when I was 15. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank
Lovely
you,
chat.
and pleasure to be here and talk to everyone else out there.